Yeah, okay. So marginal cost is supply under competition. Where demand and supply intersect, that's the competitive equilibrium. So competitive quantity. The price is the competitive price. Do you see?
Wait, this is the homework, right, sir? You talking about the homework?
Yeah, the exercise, right? Exactly.
Oh, all right, yeah.
And then, are you with me, Edward?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if it's a monopoly, the monopoly equilibrium is where the marginal revenue and the marginal cost intersect. That's the quantity. And then you go up to demand to get the price. So and this graph also is kind of helpful. Again, you can see it says efficient quantity, that's the competitive quantity. And then you have deadweight loss there, right? So if you look at this graph and this graph from the lecture, it gives you a really, really good idea of what we're talking about. It's not just because you look at the monopoly curves for exercise 18 question number 1 doesn't mean there's not a competitive equilibrium there too. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's the whole idea between monopoly and competition is that you look at monopoly as an economist, you say there's an inefficiency here. Can we break this up and make it competitive? And if so, would there be an improvement, right? Would there be less deadweight loss? That's the name of the game.
So
Okay.
basically, it's just taking away the one of the lines in the graph to get the supply and demand.
Well, I can't answer that. Okay, all I can do is say just look at those graphs and look at the other ones and then like match it up. Because so when you mean take away one of the lines, you mean that the marginal revenue is irrelevant to the intersection of, remember, marginal cost of supply of
Yeah,
demand
so
and
it's marginal
supply.
cost of supply and the demand. We just take away the marginal revenue, right?
Yeah, for the competitive equilibrium, that's right.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing and okay. Now, I actually do want to talk about something different. And so let me go back here. And this is the main topic that I wanted to talk about today. So we have our last assignment on lithium, and it's not actually due for a while, but you guys can come back to this lecture when you need to. And you'll notice if we go under imperfect competition, the first 5 questions here under practice are all just about monopolistic competition. So I think that's fine. That'll be pretty straightforward. But if you go under the homework, and everybody can see the homework assignments and stuff like that right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So if you go under this and I do take now, you notice, again, there are extra questions, but these other questions have to do with a different topic, which is game theory. And so in order for you guys to answer, for y'all to answer these questions, you really, and can you see the oligopoly lecture slides now? Yeah or no?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is, and there's a part in your book too, but I'm going to show you this. This is the main point. And okay, can you see the textbook now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the textbook, the Oligopoly in Practice section. It goes over this, and it's called a game matrix. It's really just a table and how to find the Nash equilibrium and the competitive solution. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. There's a lot of other background, and let me just see if I can open this up so that you can get a bigger picture. Okay. Because I was in a Zoom meeting the other day and they had a slide up, but it was so small I couldn't see it. So let's hope that they're gonna convert this for us so we can watch it. Boy, it's taken a long time. Okay, I'll go back to this one. Hopefully this is this big enough that you all can see, like Bonnie gets 8 years, Clyde gets 8 years, and so forth?
Yeah.
Okay, so so this table, like I said, it's called a game matrix, and to kind of see where we want to go, there are a couple of different industry structures, and we mentioned them earlier in an earlier chapter, but it basically looks like this. You have these two questions: how many firms are there in an industry, and what are the types of products? And if you have just one firm, then you have a monopoly. If you have a few firms, we call that an oligopoly. The simplest example of oligopoly is where you have just two firms, and that's called a duopoly. But you could have 3 or 4 or 5 firms, but they're just a few. And then notice that all of the products here are supposed to be largely the same, right? But if you have a bunch of firms with identical products, then you have perfect competition. But if you have a bunch of firms with differentiated products, then you have this monopolistic competition. And that was the first part of your homework. And I think monopolistic competition is pretty easy. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. It's pretty easy in the sense that it's easy to understand. The analysis isn't very, very complicated or detailed. But I'll also say in passing that monopolistic competition is fascinating and important because it actually describes most of the products that you guys are familiar with. So if you think about different types of sodas or jeans or different types of music or video games or breakfast cereals, there you have a lot of what we call product differentiation. But if you think about like tennis balls, right? Is there really a big difference between Wilson and Penn? I don't know. Crude oil, certainly not really, right? Do you care if your crude oil is pumped out of the ground by Exxon or Mobil or Conoco or Phillips? They're the same, right? So things at an industrial level, like corn and rice produced by different farmers, they're largely the same. And again, we've already talked about monopoly, so I won't go over that again, but monopoly is really the character of monopoly has to deal with barriers to entry that keep other firms from coming in to compete. So when we're talking about oligopoly, the big issue is, remember, when there are lots of firms competing with one another and the products are the same under perfect competition, we say that the firms don't have any pricing power. They are price takers. They can't influence the price of the product that they're selling. But when you're an oligopolist, you're one of a few firms. So I'll give you guys a good modern example that a lot of people point to as being an oligopoly, and it's in telecommunications. AT&T, Sprint, Verizon. They're just a few firms. A lot of times people also say that automobile manufacturers are an oligopoly because there's just, you know, Toyota, Honda, Ford, GM. There are only like a few. Now, obviously, it depends, but normally people break it down into like classes of vehicles. So if you think about like mid-size pickup trucks, right? Ford, GM, Dodge, Toyota, that's about it. If you think about mid-size vehicles like Honda Accord type vehicles, there's Toyota Camry, Honda Accord, maybe a few others, Kia Optima, maybe. But that doesn't mean there's not also this other sort of product differentiation in other classes of vehicles. So oligopoly, you know, coming up with good examples can be a little bit challenging, but nevertheless, we're going to focus in on duopoly, and the characterization of oligopoly is that firms do have pricing power. They don't have as much pricing power as a monopolist. Remember, a monopolist can charge whatever price they want. I say within reason. Obviously, they can charge whatever price they want, but if they want to maximize their profits, they have to understand that if they charge a price that's too high, no one will be able to afford to buy their product. So monopolists don't normally charge a price of infinity because they won't have any customers. But in oligopoly, for the first time, we see what we're going to call strategic interaction in pricing. So the firms, and we're going to take this simplest example, a duopoly. There are just two of them. And so firm number one knows that if they charge a high price, that firm two will get all of the customers because they're selling the same product. So it's kind of like gas stations on opposite corners of an intersection. The one that has it a penny cheaper will get all the customers. So a lot of times you'll see that they match penny for penny the prices that they're charging. So that's the situation we're talking about. Does anybody have any questions about the general idea of oligopoly? Okay. And remember, I don't have the chat on, so if you have a question, please just speak up. So monopoly is the first time we see, again, what we call strategic interaction. Strategic interaction means that in the case of firms trying to maximize their profits, that the profit of the firm, for example, in competition, is non-strategic. The competitive firm, because they're a small part of the market, doesn't matter what they do, they're not going to affect the profits of other firms in the same industry because they won't affect the price at all. But in oligopoly, since there are just two firms, the choices of one firm with respect to price or output will affect the profits of the other firm and vice versa. So economists a long time ago, there's a famous Nobel Prize winning economics Nobel Prize winner named John Forbes Nash. He developed this idea of Nash Equilibrium, and it's been used widely outside of economics to talk about situations where you have just a small number of people interacting with one another. And in that way, it's like a game. So is there anybody here that plays poker? Because poker is a good example.
Yeah.
Who plays poker? Who's talking to me?
Jonathan.
Jonathan. Okay, Jonathan. So you know in poker, right, Jonathan? I don't know. What do you like to play? You like to play Texas Hold'em?
Yeah, Texas Hold'em.
Yeah, good game. So but have you ever won at a Texas Hold'em tournament?
Not at a tournament. I just play with my friends.
Yeah, that's a good way. So I have a story. I went to this big econ conference, and it was they were specializing in game theory. So it was game theory specialists from all the universities that you've ever heard of, Harvard, Yale, UC this, UC that. And I got invited because I'd written this paper, and they had a Texas Hold'em tournament. And I didn't win, but I beat most of them. I made it, they did rounds, and I made it to the final table. But then I just quit because it was too late in the morning and I had enough bragging rights already. But yeah, it's a great game. But right? And I'll tell you that the table that I shut down by bluffing, right? And are you a bluffer, Jonathan?
No, I'm not very well. Basically, my strategy is I don't look at my cards. So
Oh, okay. So then you can't bluff. I mean, like everything's a bluff because you don't know either.
yeah, exactly. It's a bluff no matter what I do, even if my
Yeah.
cards are good or bad.
Yeah. Well, so the point is, and I kind of was doing a little bit what you were doing, since all these people that I was playing with were like expert game theorists from all over the world. They wanted to win really, really badly. And the advantage that I had is I didn't really care. So I would, put crazy bets and whatever, and people couldn't figure out what I was doing, because they couldn't figure out that I just really didn't care. So anyway, I got lucky. It worked to my advantage. But the point is that me winning in any particular hand doesn't depend just on what cards I have and what cards the other person has. It depends upon how they play them, right? So you could have a great hand and I could have a bad hand, but if you don't play that hand in the right way, you don't bet in the right way, I'm going to win, right?
Exactly.
That's strategic interaction. And so Nash analyzed games. By the way, he did not analyze poker that I know of. But games like that in the real world where there's strategic interaction, and he called them games. So this is one example. This is the most common one. It's called the prisoner's dilemma. And there's a scenario here. I don't know if anybody remembers any of these movies. I wish I could remember the name of the movie because there was a good movie a while ago about two teenagers who, and maybe somebody knows this movie, but there was a great scene in it. There's two teenagers and they come from, this community where they're both, what really connects them is that they're both really great students and they're pretty sure that they're going to get into Ivy League schools, and they're kind of rowdy. And so they decide that before they go off to college, they want to have the experience of killing somebody, which is pretty like crazy, right? But they decided they're going to plan it so they couldn't get caught, and they go ahead and they kill this person, and it's like kind of like a homeless person, vagrant type person, and they figure that they can't get caught. But then anyway, the police catch them, but they don't have enough evidence, so they take the two co-conspirators and they separate them and put them in separate rooms, and then they begin to offer them a deal, right? If you tell me what I want to know, I'll say you're cooperating or you're helping with the investigation, and then we'll give you probation or something like that, and your friend will bear the weight of the prosecution. And they tell the other person the same thing, and they try to in that way break them down to get them to confess. And that's what this situation is supposed to reflect. The person on the left here, this is Bonnie and Clyde. And so I don't know if you all remember the famous bank robbers, Bonnie and Clyde from the 1920s, but it's a pretty famous story. So Clyde is what we would call the role player, and he has these two actions available. He can either confess and help out by giving evidence for the prosecution, or he can remain silent, which is actually like out of loyalty or cooperation with Bonnie, right? To give no evidence. And Bonnie is what we call the column player, and her strategies, notice that they're symmetric. She has a strategy, she can confess or remain silent. And then each one of these cells in this table gives the payoff or the outcome of the strategies of these players when they're played together. So for example, if Bonnie chooses to confess and Clyde chooses to confess, then this top left-hand upper corner cell gives Bonnie's payoff, which is she does 8 years in prison. And we just say payoff generally, you can say outcome, it's fine. And the bottom part of the cell gives the outcome to Clyde. He does 8 years in prison. There's evidence to convict both of them. And if Clyde confesses, but Bonnie says nothing, there's evidence to convict Bonnie. Basically, Clyde saying, Bonnie did it all, and I'll testify against her. And so then she does 20 years in prison, and Clyde goes free because he helped out with the investigation. And if you look at it, again, the payoffs are symmetric. If Bonnie decides to remain silent and Clyde decides to remain silent, then they each get a year. There's enough evidence to convict them of something like, you know, they're pulled over in a speeding car and they can of reckless driving or something, but not for the robbery. And if Clyde remains silent while Bonnie gives evidence, then Bonnie goes free for helping out. And then she said, Clyde did it, and I'll testify against him, and he does 20 years. So does everybody understand the basic setup here and what everything means? Are we good? Jonathan, are you good?
Yeah.
Okay. So what this is supposed to illustrate is that there's a tension between Bonnie and Clyde's decision that's motivated of self-interest and to cooperate or help out the other person who's your friend. And so the way that Nash analyzed this game is he said, well, what a player in a strategic situation will do, well, they'll consider each of their options, which is what the other player would potentially do. And then they'll just choose what's best for them under each of those potential situations. So let's analyze a situation that the way that Nash would. So John, I was talking to you. So can I talk to you for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. So suppose Bonnie chooses confess, right? And you're Clyde. So if you know that Bonnie has chosen confess, you're considering that option. It's like, you know, you're thinking, okay, the other player could do this or they could do that. So if Bonnie chooses confess, would you choose confess or remain silent?
For Clyde's best self-interest, it would make sense for him to confess.
Yeah, because he's choosing between 20 years and 8 years. Now consider the other option. Now suppose you're like, well, if Bonnie remains silent, then should I confess or remain silent?
You'd still confess because then he would go free.
Yeah, because doing no time is better than doing a year. Now, I want to point out that what we've just noted in the prisoner's dilemma is there's a dominant action or a dominant strategy, which is to Clyde to always choose confess, regardless of what Bonnie chooses. That's what it means to be dominant, is it gives you a better payoff or a better outcome, regardless of what the other player does. So confess is going to end up with Clyde doing strictly less time in jail, regardless of what Bonnie does. See what I mean? So in that sense, it's dominant. Now, if we do the same thing from Bonnie's perspective, right? So let's go ahead and walk through this one. It's symmetric, so it's going to be easy, but just to make sure we see. So if Bonnie says, okay, suppose Clyde remains silent, should Bonnie choose confess or remain silent?
Confess still.
Yeah. And likewise, if Clyde chooses confess, should Bonnie choose confess or remain silent?
Confess.
Yeah. So they both have a dominant strategy to choose confess and confess, to both give evidence for their prosecution and act out of their self-interest. And this is what we call the Nash Equilibrium, where both players play the outcome that's in their best interest. But the important thing for economists to note is that when we compare that to what we call the cooperative outcome, which is where they both remain loyal to each other, and they both remain silent, that notice that the outcome is better for both of them, right? Like Bonnie would do less time and Clyde would do less time. And as a group of Bonnie and Clyde together, the time is less than any of the other options, right? In the other options, considering them as a unit, as a group, they're doing more time in prison, right, than under any other outcome. So the cooperative outcome is the best for the group. Do you see what I mean, Jonathan?
Yes.
Yeah. So and what economists have noted is the real problem here is that there's no enforcement mechanism for cooperation. Bonnie and Clyde, before this all happened, they can't, and the reason why we talk about this in terms of prisoner's dilemma and crimes is because it makes it clear that there's no formal contract that they can write with one another, no formal enforcement mechanism where, for example, Bonnie and Clyde enter into a confidentiality agreement that has legal consequences. That, listen, you said you wouldn't say anything, and I said I wouldn't say anything, and we have it on contract. So if you say anything about the evidence of this case, then I'm going to sue you or something, right? No, it would be illegal. They're criminals, and the court wouldn't enforce any sort of confidentiality agreement to keep a crime secret. So they're on their own. They just have to just trust each other. And if they believe the other one's going to act in their own self-interest, then each of them has an incentive to just do what's best for them individually. And as the cooperation breaks down, they both end up worse off. So from an economic point of view, there's inefficiency that's created in a prisoner's dilemma situation. Now, let's bring this to a more realistic case. Now, I want to point out to you all that when you solve the problems on Ignifium, what you're going to have to do is draw yourself a little table like this and label a row and a column player and their strategies, and then fill in the payoffs in the same way. So that's really the reason why I wanted to focus on this today. So those last 5 questions on homework 18, you'd be able to work out for yourselves and know that what I've got to do is I've got to draw myself a little table and fill it out. Okay, Jonathan, does that make sense?
Sounds good.
Okay, so this is another situation that's famously analyzed. It has to do with the Opec Oil Cartel, and you can see here 2 members of OPEC, Iraq and Iran, and they have an economic decision to make that's going to influence their profits and the price of oil. So what we know is that if production is high, oil price is going to be low. And if production is low, oil price is going to be high. So this cooperative outcome where they both don't produce very much and they push the price of oil high, that's supposed to be like monopoly, because remember, monopoly is the lowest level of production and the highest price possible to create the most profits. The monopolist can do that because the monopolist has absolute pricing power because they're the only producer. When there are just a few firms, like here, it's a duopoly, again, whether or not that high price, low output strategy of the monopolist pays off depends on what the other player is going to do. So let's look at the outcomes here. So there's one outcome where they both produce a lot of oil, oil prices are low, and they both get $40 billion in profits each. Now, the other situation here is where, for example, if Iraq doesn't produce very much oil and Iran produces a lot of oil, it's high production, then the price is driven up a little bit because Iraq isn't supplying very much to the market. But because Iran is able to take advantage of that higher price and a higher output level, they make a lot of profit, right? They get 60 billion, while Iraq suffers from not producing very much, even though the price is higher, and they get 30 billion. And then there's the monopoly or cooperative outcome where they both produce not very much, and the price is high, and they don't produce very much, but their profits are high because the price is so much higher because there's such a huge restriction on supply. So they each get 50 billion. And then here's a symmetric case. And again, of high production for Iraq and low production for Iran, where Iran only gets 30 billion and Iraq gets 60 billion. So let's go ahead and walk through again the Nash Equilibrium solution. We look at, again, for each player, what's the best action, holding the action of the other player constant. So if Iraq chooses high production, Iran chooses between high and low. Well, 40 is better than 30, so Iran chooses high production. If Iraq, in the other situation, chooses low production, Iran chooses between high and low. High of 60 is better than low of 50. So again, it's a prisoner's dilemma. There's a dominant strategy of high production. It's symmetric, so they both choose high production, and you get the Nash Equilibrium solution, which is they both end up with $40 billion in profits, and production is high. The cooperative solution, notice they would both be better off, and the industry overall would be better off. There would be low production, and they would each get $50 billion and totally $100 billion instead of 40 and 40, and a total of 80 billion for the industry. So I'll ask, does anybody have any questions about that analysis? You could go back and review this video later, but I want to make sure that there's enough that you feel comfortable with the Nash Equilibrium and the cooperative solution.
Sir.
Go ahead.
Lawrence.
Yeah, hi, Lawrence.
Okay, so example, if you're Iran, right? So if you're Iran, the best decision that you would make is probably like Iran probably would do high production, and then Iraq do low production, because Iran will make $10 billion more, right? But
oh yeah, you mean like over here? That would be great for Iran, but they can't, again, enforce. That's the other thing, right? So again, there's no, the reason why this is a good example is OPEC is what we call a cartel, which is an informal monopoly, and it's informal because there's no legal mechanism in international law to prevent one country from producing more oil. So Iran would love to get the 60 billion, but they can't do anything to make Iraq produce low production while they produce high. You see what I mean, Lawrence?
Oh, so in this graph, so which one will be the best? Probably Iraq with low production and Iran low production, right? Because they make
Yeah, that would be the monopoly cooperative, the cartel solution that would be best. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, all right.
But again, like I just showed you, when they play Nash Equilibrium, they end up at a high production. They both lose profit.
So what is the difference between this situation and the situation that you had like before, the one with
Bonnie and Clyde?
Yeah, Bonnie and Clyde. Yeah. So what's the difference between that two?
Well, the only difference here is the payoffs for Bonnie and Clyde are in terms of years in prison, and the payoffs for Iran and Iraq are in dollars.
Oh,
Remember, the payoff is just the outcome. So this is a general game where we're just looking at the outcome in terms of like years. But generally in economic settings where we're talking about producers and manufacturers in an oligopoly, remember we're talking about an industry where there are only a couple of firms. We know firms care about profits. So all of our payoffs here, all of our outcomes are in terms of profits. So this is a general situation. This one is specific to the economics of production.
Yeah. I just thought, so the Bonnie and Clyde situation, I just thought like, okay, so if they like Clyde, right? Okay, so the best one is both of them remain silent, but the reason why one person will confess, because what if the two person, like, Bonnie and Clyde don't get to see each other and talk about their plan,
Yeah.
and they're separating both of them, and like if I was Clyde, I would thinking I'd be like, oh, Bonnie will probably be the one who confess, because that makes him the most interest. So
Yeah.
Clyde probably will also choose the one which is best for him.
Yep. So that's what I'm saying. This is the Nash Equilibrium, confess.
So yeah, that will be confess. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess the main point that I also wanted to make is that I don't want you to look at these graphs, because it depends upon the way that you label the strategies or the actions. So here we have high production, low production. If there's nothing in the problem that's going to tell you the order in which to label them. So if I had labeled the first column low production and the second column high production, and did the same thing for Iran, then the Nash equilibrium wouldn't be in the upper left-hand corner. It would be in the lower right-hand corner. So I don't want anybody to look at these and think, oh, it's always the upper left that is the Nash equilibrium, and it's always the lower right that is the cooperative outcome.
Yeah, but
because it just depends on how you draw the table. That's the main point.
Yeah, but my thing is, what I think is, isn't Iran wants to have higher production, which is gonna get like has more money, and isn't Iraq also gonna follow up the same thing, and aren't they gonna end up with both high production?
Well, yeah, exactly. So, but I just want to point out that when you go through the homework for question 18, you got to draw out a table like this. And then you're going to be asked to compare the Nash equilibrium to the cooperative outcome. So you got to find the Nash equilibrium. And the Nash equilibrium is only going to be identified by going through the steps that we did, which is, okay, let's hold one strategy constant for the column player and see what's best for the row player, 40 versus 30. Do you follow me, Jonathan? Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, this is
I was,
Lauren.
yeah, I know it's Lawrence. I was just gonna ask Jonathan because he was talking.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, Jonathan's maybe not gonna talk. But Edward, do you follow this? Maybe not. Okay. Anybody else want to ask a question? Okay. Well, I'm going to assume, again, you guys can come back and view this, but you have to go through the steps to find the Nash equilibrium. That's the main point. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. And, oh, we're over time. So I'm going to end it there and say, I'll see y'all real soon. Okay.
Have a good one.
Okay. You too.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Okay. All right. Bye.